The slap echoed across the courthouse hallway, Officer Brennan's hand leaving a crimson imprint on Aria Jackson's ebony cheek. Her law degree certificate shattered on the marble floor. Security cameras captured everything, yet 3 officers stood by smirking. "File all the complaints you want, Counselor," Brennan whispered, his badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. "Nobody will believe you." What nobody realized was that Aria had already pressed record on her phone, capturing not just the slap, but something far more damning, something that would shake the entire justice system. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and courage, let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in the power of justice to overcome racism, hit that like and subscribe button because tomorrow's special episode reveals how ordinary citizens are fighting back against systemic oppression in ways you absolutely cannot miss. Aria Jackson stood on the courthouse steps, savoring her victory. At 32, she had already built a reputation as one of the most brilliant black attorneys in the state. Today's win against the police department in a brutality case only cemented that status. The morning sun glinted off her perfectly pressed navy suit as she mentally reviewed her successful arguments. Judge Williams had not only ruled in her favor, but had commended her exceptional grasp of constitutional law and commitment to justice. As she entered the courthouse for her second hearing of the day, Aria noticed Officer Ryan Brennan and 2 colleagues huddled near the security checkpoint. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they spotted her. Brennan's ice-blue eyes tracked her movement across the marble floor, his jaw tightening visibly. Aria recognized him immediately as the partner of the officer she had just defeated in court. She maintained her professional composure, nodding politely as she passed. "Good morning, officers," she said, her voice steady and confident despite the hostility radiating from their postures. Brennan gave no verbal response, just a curt nod that seemed more threat than acknowledgement. The morning hearing proceeded brilliantly. Judge Williams repeatedly sided with Aria's arguments regarding the admissibility of evidence in another police misconduct case. Counselor Jackson's analysis of Terry versus Ohio is both nuanced and persuasive, the judge had remarked, causing Aria's opposing counsel to slouch defeatedly in his chair. As Aria packed her briefcase after the victory, she felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing her client would receive justice. The hallway had mostly cleared as the lunch hour approached. Aria checked her watch, calculating if she had time to review notes before her afternoon appointment with a new client. The sound of footsteps behind her barely registered until a voice cut through her thoughts. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Counselor?" Officer Brennan had followed her into the now empty corridor. 2 of his colleagues lingered at the far end, watching but maintaining plausible deniability. Aria turned slowly, maintaining professional distance. "Officer Brennan, I'm simply doing my job representing my clients." "Your job?" Brennan stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Your job is taking sides against the blue, making us look like criminals when we're out there risking our lives." The TU. "Constitution applies to everyone, officer," Aria replied calmly, though her heart rate accelerated. "Including those your colleagues arrest. I don't create the facts of these cases." Something dangerous flashed in Brennan's eyes. "You think you know everything about justice with your fancy degree and big words, but out on those streets we're the only thing standing between civilization and chaos." Aria stood her ground. "I believe in the rule of law, Officer Brennan. That applies to everyone, including law enforcement." What happened next seemed almost choreographed in its deliberateness. Brennan's face contorted with rage as his hand swung in a wide arc, connecting with Aria's cheek with such force that she stumbled backward. The framed law degree she'd been carrying shattered as it hit the floor, glass fragmenting across the polished marble. The sound of the slap echoed down the empty hallway. "File all the complaints you want," Brennan sneered, leaning in close. "It's your word against mine. And nobody's going to believe some cop-hating lawyer over a decorated officer." What Brennan didn't realize was that Aria had already activated the recording app on her phone when he first approached, but she captured more than just the assault. As Brennan continued his tirade, he inadvertently revealed something far more incriminating. "You think that Williams' case was bad? You have no idea what we've had to clean up. Evidence doesn't just fix itself to get convictions, you know. Sometimes it needs a little help, especially with these gang cases. Your client Jefferson, The gun we found wasn't even his, but it doesn't matter now, does it? He'll rot in prison where he belongs. Arya maintained her composure, despite the stinging pain blooming across her face. Her mind raced, processing the implications of what she'd just recorded. An officer admitting to evidence tampering. This wasn't just about a slap anymore. This was about corruption at a systemic level. "Are you threatening me, Officer Brennan?" she asked, careful to get more on record. "Take it however you want," Brennan replied, adjusting his badge. "Just know that we take care of problems in our department, and you're becoming a very big problem." His colleagues at the end of the hall snickered, one of them pantomiming a slapping motion. Instead of confronting him further, Arya made a strategic decision. She gathered the broken pieces of her frame, maintained eye contact with Brennan momentarily, and walked away with dignity intact. Inside, her mind was already formulating a legal strategy. This wasn't just assault. This was the thread that could unravel years of potential misconduct. Justice isn't about vengeance, she thought to herself as she pushed open the heavy courthouse doors. It's about using the system correctly to expose those who corrupt it. Her cheek throbbed with pain, but her resolve had never been stronger. Arya drove directly to the police precinct, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The red mark on her face had begun to darken, physical evidence of Brennan's assault. She parked her car and took several deep breaths, reviewing her legal options and rights before entering the lion's den. The precinct buzzed with activity, but a hush fell as she walked through the door. Eyes tracked her movement across the lobby, whispers following in her wake. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with Robertson on his nameplate, looked up with immediate recognition and something else in his eyes. Wariness. Hostility. "I need to file a complaint against an officer," Arya stated firmly, maintaining direct eye contact with Sergeant Robertson. "Have a seat," he replied after a long pause. "Someone will be with you when available." 1 hour stretched into 2, then 3. Officers came and went, deliberately avoiding her gaze. Some whispered and chuckled while glancing in her direction. Arya remained seated, back straight, occasionally documenting the time and interactions in her phone's notes app. The recording of the assault remained safely backed up to her cloud storage. After nearly 4 hours, Sergeant Robertson finally called her to the desk. "We can take your statement now," he said, without apology for the wait. Arya meticulously detailed the encounter, with Officer Brennan, including the assault and threats. As she spoke, Robertson's expression remained impassive, his fingers slowly typing her statement. When she mentioned the broken law degree frame, he raised an eyebrow skeptically. "And you have witnesses to this alleged assault?" he asked. "The security cameras in the courthouse hallway will have captured everything," Arya replied confidently. After she completed her statement, Robertson tapped a few keys and frowned at his computer. "System seems to be glitching. Looks like your complaint didn't save properly. We'll need to start over." Arya's suspicion flared. "That's quite a coincidence, Sergeant. I'd like to file again immediately." The second attempt proceeded with Robertson, typing even more slowly, asking her to repeat details multiple times, questioning her recollection with increasing skepticism. After finally completing the statement, Robertson made a phone call. "Lieutenant Hayes will want to speak with you about this serious accusation against one of his officers," he explained, emphasizing the word accusation with obvious doubt. Lieutenant Hayes arrived 30 minutes later, tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair and a carefully cultivated air of authority. He invited Arya to a small interview room. "Ms. Jackson, I understand you're claiming one of my best officers assaulted you today," Hayes began, leaning back in his chair. "Officer Brennan has an impeccable record and numerous commendations. I'm not claiming anything, Lieutenant. I'm reporting an assault that occurred," Arya corrected firmly. Hayes smiled thinly. "These high-stress courthouse situations can sometimes lead to misunderstandings. Perhaps Officer Brennan moved suddenly, and you misinterpreted his actions. Or maybe there was a verbal exchange that you found threatening." Lieutenant Hayes, Officer Brennan, deliberately slapped me across the face with enough force to knock me off balance. There was no misunderstanding. "And why would a decorated officer with 15 years of service risk his career by assaulting an attorney in a public building?" Hayes asked, his tone suggesting the very idea was absurd. Perhaps because he believed there would be no consequences, Arya replied evenly. Just as you're attempting to minimize and dismiss what happened. Hayes leaned forward. Miss Jackson, you've developed quite a reputation for cases against our department. Some might suggest you have a motivation to fabricate incidents like this. I have video evidence of the assault, Lieutenant. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Hayes sat up straighter, his expression hardening. Video evidence? I'd like to see that immediately. I'm sure you would, Arya replied. But given the nature of Officer Brennan's threats and your department's apparent reluctance to take my complaint seriously, I'll be preserving that evidence for proper legal channels. Hayes's friendly facade vanished completely. Listen carefully. Counselor, these kinds of accusations have serious repercussions for everyone involved. If there's been some minor misunderstanding, perhaps we could handle this internally. Officer Brennan could apologize for any perceived offense, and we could all move forward professionally. No need for formal complaints or videos that might fit to misinterpreted. Are you suggesting I withdraw a legitimate complaint of assault against an officer, Lieutenant Hayes? I'm suggesting that smart attorneys know which battles are worth fighting, Hayes replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper, and which might follow them throughout their careers. Arya stood, gathering her belongings. I believe we're finished here. I expect my complaint to be properly filed and investigated. And, Lieutenant, if anything happens to me or if that video mysteriously disappears from my secured accounts, copies are already with people I trust. She walked out of the precinct with her head high, ignoring the stares that followed her. As she drove away, Arya noticed a patrol car pull out behind her, maintaining a consistent distance all the way to her apartment building. Would you comment number 1 if you believe police? Departments should be held accountable when they attempt to silence victims? Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone standing up to intimidation tactics, and subscribe to see more stories of everyday heroes fighting for justice against impossible odds. What would you do if you were in Arya's position with evidence of corruption but facing a wall of blue silence? The battle for justice is just beginning, and you won't believe what happens next. Arya woke to her phone buzzing incessantly. Dozens of notifications flooded her screen, predominantly from social media apps she rarely used. Bleary-eyed at 5:43 a.m., she scrolled through the first few messages and felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Anonymous accounts had posted her home address across multiple platforms. Arya Jackson thinks she can attack our police and hide in her fancy apartment at 1847 Willow Street, Unit 3B. Let's show her what we think about cop haters. The comments beneath were even more chilling. Someone should teach her a lesson. Wonder. If she'd still be so smug with a few broken bones, bet she wouldn't be the first lawyer to have an accident. Arya immediately contacted building security and forwarded the threats. As she showered and dressed for the day, her laptop chimed repeatedly with email alerts. Logging in, she discovered her law firm's website had been defaced overnight with racist imagery and slurs superimposed over her professional headshot. Her personal email contained dozens of messages from unknown senders, with subject lines like "race traitor" and "we know where you sleep." Several contained photoshopped images of her in compromising and violent scenarios, clearly designed to humiliate and intimidate. While on the phone with IT support at her firm, her office line began ringing. 3 clients called in rapid succession, all withdrawing their cases with vague explanations about finding representation better suited to their needs. One client admitted that someone had called him claiming to be from the Bar Association, warning that Arya was under investigation for ethics violations. Her cell phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. "We know your mother visits every Sunday at 11. Still drives that silver Honda. Would be a shame if her brakes failed like that Johnson case last year." The specific reference to her mother's routine and the mention of an internal police case sent ice through Arya's veins. This wasn't random harassment. This was coordinated, with information only police would have access to. She called Marcus Green, a cybersecurity expert who had consulted on several of her technology-related cases. "This is definitely coordinated," Marcus confirmed after reviewing the digital evidence Arya had forwarded. The timing of the posts, the similar language patterns and the technical signatures suggest multiple people working from a shared playbook. Can you trace anything back to the source? Arya asked. Some of it, yes. Several of these accounts accessed from IP addresses registered to, well, you're not going to be shocked, the Central Precinct building. I need everything documented for evidence, Arya instructed. Screenshots, IP logs, timestamps, everything preserved with proper chain of custody protocols. Already on it, Marcus assured her. And Arya, I'm setting up enhanced security monitoring on all your accounts. These people don't seem like they're planning to stop. Throughout the day, Arya methodically documented each instance of harassment, building a detailed chronology. The pattern was clear. This was a deliberate campaign to intimidate her into dropping her complaint against Brennan. By evening, she had compiled a comprehensive report and contacted the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department. After explaining the situation to several increasingly senior officers, she finally connected with investigator Jordan Walker, who seemed genuinely concerned by her account. This type of coordinated harassment, if proven, represents serious misconduct, Jordan assured her. I'll open an investigation immediately. I've heard that before, Arya replied skeptically. I understand your hesitation, Ms. Jackson. Let me at least assign this an official case number and begin the process. You can check the status at any time. Arya ended the call feeling cautiously optimistic. An official investigation number meant documentation, oversight, potential accountability. Within an hour, Jordan emailed confirmation of the case opening with a detailed outline of next steps. The digital harassment tapered slightly over the next 2 days. Fewer new accounts appeared, and some of the most threatening posts were removed. Arya allowed herself to hope that perhaps the official investigation had sent a warning signal to those involved. That fragile hope was shattered when Marcus called her late on the 3rd evening. Arya, I've been running additional security sweeps around your digital presence and something concerning came up. There's a hidden camera positioned in the exterior hallway of your apartment building, aimed directly at your door. It's not part of the building's security system. Are you certain? Positive it's transmitting data to an external server. And Arya, that server is registered to a shell company that shares an address with a private security firm founded by ex-police officers. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The digital harassment hadn't stopped because they were intimidated by the investigation. It had simply shifted to more direct surveillance. They were watching her movements, tracking her visitors, gathering intelligence on her daily life. Don't remove it yet, Arya decided after careful consideration. If they're watching me, maybe I can control what they see and gather evidence on who's accessing that feed. As she spoke, her apartment felt suddenly alien and unsafe. What else might they be monitoring? Who exactly was they? And how far would they go to protect Officer Brennan and whatever larger secrets his assault and subsequent admission were connected to? Monday morning, Arya arrived at the prestigious law offices of Winthrop, Malloy and Stein to find an unusual sight, the senior partners waiting in the lobby rather than sequestered in their corner offices. Thomas Bennett, her closest colleague, shot her a warning glance from behind the reception desk. Arya, we need to speak with you immediately, said Stephen Winthrop, the firm's founding partner. His typically warm demeanor had been replaced by a rigid formality that set alarm bells ringing. In the main conference room, manila folders were arranged precisely at each seat. Joan Malloy, the firm's managing partner, gestured for Arya to sit, beside a folder significantly thicker than the others. We've received some concerning communications about your conduct, Malloy began without preamble. Multiple clients have filed complaints. Arya opened the folder to find complaint letters from clients she had successfully represented for years. The allegations ranged from overbilling to professional incompetence to ethical violations. Many contained nearly identical language despite supposedly coming from unrelated individuals. These are fabricated, Arya stated firmly. I spoke with Darnell Jackson just yesterday about his appeal strategy. He gave no indication of dissatisfaction. Perhaps not to you directly, Winthrop interjected. People often avoid confrontation. Malloy slid another document across the table. We've also received this from the police department. Formal complaints about your alleged interference with ongoing investigations and harassment of officers. The police complaint bore Lieutenant Hayes' signature, claiming Arya had developed a personal vendetta against the department and repeatedly made false allegations to undermine legitimate police work. You're not seriously giving credence to these obviously retaliatory claims? Arya asked incredulously. Richard Stein, the firm's most senior litigator, spoke for the first time. Arya, your work has been exemplary since you joined us, but the volume and nature of these complaints require us to take temporary action while we investigate. We are placing you on administrative leave effective immediately. This is exactly what they want, Arya protested. They're targeting me because I reported Officer Brennan for assault and caught him admitting to evidence tampering on record. If you have evidence of police misconduct, you should provide it to the appropriate authorities, Stein replied. However, our immediate concern is protecting the firm's reputation and client relationships. After the partners left, Thomas remained behind. This isn't right, he whispered. The timing is too convenient. What else do you know, Thomas? Arya asked, studying his concerned expression. Officers came by last week asking questions about you. Not in any official capacity, just concerns about a colleague. They spent nearly an hour with the partners. Back at her office, Arya discovered her case files had been accessed. Digital timestamps showed someone had reviewed her most sensitive police misconduct cases during the weekend, when the office should have been empty. Certain key documents were missing from both physical and digital files. They're systematically dismantling my cases, she realized. Not just intimidating me, but undermining my professional credibility and removing evidence of patterns of misconduct. Thomas helped her quickly copy essential documents before her system access was revoked. I'll keep you updated from inside, he promised. This isn't over. Working from her apartment, Arya attempted to contact clients who had supposedly filed complaints. Most didn't return her calls. Two who did seemed confused, claiming they'd received concerning information about her from official sources they couldn't disclose. That evening, an unmarked envelope was slipped under her door. Inside was a printed note using letters cut from magazines. Drop the Brennan complaint or the next envelope will contain something much worse. Returning from a brief grocery run, Arya noticed subtle differences in her apartment. The stack of legal journals on her coffee table had been rearranged. Her laptop was closed when she distinctly remembered leaving it open. Her framed photo of her family was tilted at a different angle. Someone had been inside her home. Nothing appeared to be missing, but the message was clear. They could enter her private space at will. The psychological warfare was escalating. Her phone rang just as she finished documenting the intrusion. It was Jordan from Internal Affairs. Ms. Jackson, I wanted to update you personally. After reviewing your complaint against Officer Brennan and the subsequent digital harassment, we've concluded our preliminary investigation. And, Arya prompted when Jordan paused, the findings are inconclusive. While there's evidence of unusual online activity, we cannot definitively link it to department personnel. And regarding the original assault allegation, the courthouse security footage from that hallway during the time frame you specified appears to be corrupted. Corrupted? That's impossibly convenient, Arya replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. I understand your frustration. However, without corroborating evidence, we cannot proceed with disciplinary action against Officer Brennan at this time. After ending the call, Arya stared at the wall for several long minutes. The system she had devoted her career to upholding was being weaponized against her. Every avenue of legitimate recourse was being systematically blocked. Would you comment? Number 1. If you believe corporations and law firms should stand by employees facing obvious retaliation, hit that like button if you think workplace intimidation should be taken more seriously. Subscribe to see how ordinary people can fight back against coordinated harassment campaigns. What would you do if both your workplace and the authorities meant to protect you suddenly turned against you? The odds keep stacking higher against Arya, but wait until you see her brilliant next move. The morning drizzle matched Arya's mood as she navigated downtown traffic to a modest office building in the older part of the city. The bronze plaque beside the entrance read simply, Eleanor Washington, Attorney at Law. What the unassuming sign didn't advertise was Washington's legendary status in civil rights litigation. For 4 decades, she had fought and won landmark cases against powerful institutions, earning both admiration and powerful enemies. Arya had never personally met Eleanor, but her reputation loomed large in legal circles. Some called her relentless, others ruthless. Everyone agreed she was extraordinarily effective. Eleanor's reception area contained no receptionist, just walls lined with framed newspaper headlines chronicling her victories and a single wooden bench. After waiting 15 minutes, a door opened, and Eleanor Washington appeared. In her 70s now, she carried herself with the straight-backed confidence of someone who had faced down giants and never flinched. "Miss Jackson," she said, her tea, voice warm but assessing. "I've been following your career with interest. Come in." Eleanor's office was a study in organized chaos. Case files were stacked in precise towers. Post-it notes created a colorful mosaic on one wall, and legal tomes were marked with dozens of colored tabs. She gestured for Arya to sit in a worn leather chair. "Tell me everything," Eleanor instructed. "And don't edit for dramatic effect. I need the unvarnished facts." For nearly 2 hours, Arya detailed the assault, the recording, the escalating harassment and the systematic dismantling of her professional standing. Eleanor took minimal notes, instead maintaining unwavering eye contact, occasionally asking precise questions that cut to the heart of key moments. When Arya finished, Eleanor was silent for nearly a minute, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "They're afraid of you," she finally said. "Not just of the recording, though that's part of it. They're afraid of what you represent. Accountability." "Will you help me?" Arya asked directly. "This won't be easy," Eleanor warned. "These patterns of harassment and retaliation are designed specifically to make victims give up. The system protects itself with layers of deniability and bureaucratic stonewalling. Taking this on means committing to a battle that will get much worse before it gets better. I understand the risks, do you? They've already invaded your home, undermined your professional reputation, and coordinated digital harassment. The next escalations could target your physical safety, your family, your future employment prospects. If I back down, Arya replied steadily, I validate everything they believe about being above accountability. I can't live with that. Eleanor nodded once, decisively. Then yes, I'll help you. And we're going to do more than defend you. We're going to expose the entire network. She pulled out a legal pad. First, we need to shift the narrative. Right now, they're controlling it. Let's change that. Within 24 hours, Eleanor had activated her extensive press contacts. A local news station ran a segment featuring Arya, speaking eloquently about police accountability and the retaliation she was facing. The story was picked up by several national outlets, framing Arya as a dedicated attorney facing systematic intimidation for doing her job. The hashtag #JusticeForArya began trending locally, then nationally. Community organizations rallied, organizing a support demonstration outside the central precinct. Arya's former clients came forward with statements about her professionalism and commitment to justice, directly contradicting the fabricated complaints. For the first time since the assault, the momentum seemed to be shifting. Eleanor filed emergency motions in federal court, documenting the pattern of harassment and retaliation. Judge Wilkerson scheduled an expedited hearing, acknowledging the serious civil rights implications. Then Eleanor's car crashed on her way to a preliminary hearing. The investigation revealed her brake lines had been cut. Though she escaped with minor injuries, the message was unmistakable. The opposition was escalating to potentially lethal tactics. As Eleanor recovered, an unexpected development occurred. Officer Daniel Tate, one of the officers who had witnessed Brennan's assault on Arya, contacted Eleanor's office requesting a confidential meeting. I can't keep silent anymore, Tate explained when they met at a secure location. What happened to Ms. Jackson isn't isolated. There's a culture in certain precincts that encourages this behavior. Problem citizens, problem lawyers, problem witnesses all get the same treatment. Intimidation, harassment, worse if necessary. Are you willing to testify to this? Eleanor asked. Tate hesitated. I have a family, 2 kids, but yes, this has gone too far. I became an officer to protect people, not to terrorize them for speaking up. With Tate's insider testimony and the growing public attention, the case began gaining serious momentum. More witnesses came forward with similar stories of intimidation after filing complaints against officers. Patterns emerged, connecting specific officers, including Brennan, to multiple incidents. Arya allowed herself to feel cautiously hopeful. The isolated battle was transforming into a movement for accountability, exactly what Eleanor had strategized. Then came the devastating betrayal. Jordan, from Internal Affairs, who had seemed genuinely concerned about Arya's case, was discovered leaking confidential case details to Lieutenant Hayes and the department's defense team. Every strategy, every witness statement, every piece of evidence Arya had submitted was being telegraphed directly to those orchestrating the harassment. Within hours of this discovery, Officer Tate withdrew his offer to testify. "Someone visited my wife while she was home alone with our kids," he explained in a shaking voice over the phone. "They knew which school my children attend, which routes they take home. I'm sorry. I can't risk my family." The media narrative began to shift as well. Anonymous sources questioned Arya's motives, suggesting she was leveraging racial tensions for publicity and career advancement. Op-eds appeared speculating about the real story behind her allegations. The most cutting blow came when Arya discovered the source of some of the most damaging leaks, Thomas Bennett, her supposedly supportive colleague. Digital forensics revealed he had been installed at the firm specifically to monitor her cases and report back to department allies. His concerned support had been a calculated performance to gain her trust and access to her strategy. "It's a setback, not the end," Eleanor insisted when Arya arrived at her office, visibly shaken by Thomas's betrayal. "They're escalating because they're desperate. We've hit something sensitive and they're throwing everything they have at containing it. They have moles everywhere," Arya pointed out. "The department, my firm, possibly even the courthouse. Which tells us this is bigger than one officer slapping an attorney," Eleanor replied, her eyes sharp with determination. "Brennan's assault was just the visible edge of something much more systemic, and now we know how far up it goes." As they strategized next steps, Arya's phone buzzed with a news alert. The police department had scheduled a press conference for the following morning. The cryptic announcement mentioned addressing recent allegations and clarifying facts for the public good. "They're planning a counteroffensive," Eleanor observed, "preparing to discredit you publicly before we can file our amended federal complaint." "Then we need to be one step ahead," Arya replied, her resolve hardening despite the setbacks. "If they're bringing this into the public arena, we make sure the public sees the whole truth." Arya returned to her apartment that evening to find her door ajar. Heart-pounding, she approached cautiously, calling building security from her cell phone. Together, they entered to find her home, transformed into a gallery of hatred. Racial. Slurs were spray-painted across her walls. Her law books had been shredded, the pages forming a macabre carpet across the living room floor. The word liar was carved into her wooden dining table. Building security called the police despite Arya's hesitation. 2 patrol officers arrived, took minimal notes and suggested it was likely just kids causing trouble. They refused to dust for fingerprints, claiming it was unnecessary for simple vandalism. When Arya pointed out that this was clearly targeted, harassment connected to her ongoing case against the department, one officer visibly smirked. "Lots of break-ins in this neighborhood lately," he commented, his tone making it clear this was both warning and threat. "Might want to consider moving somewhere safer." The next morning, Arya's landlord called with thinly disguised hostility. "We've received numerous complaints about disturbances coming from your unit, and now vandalism that's affecting property values." "Complaints? From whom?" Arya challenged. "Multiple residents, and the building association is concerned about the type of elements you're attracting to our community." "I'm the victim of a crime," Arya reminded him, "and these complaints only began after I filed charges against a police officer. Nevertheless, if these problems continue, we'll have to discuss early termination of your lease." Eleanor filed, an emergency restraining order against Officer Brennan and key members of the department command structure, citing the escalating pattern of harassment and the direct threat to Aria's safety. The case was assigned to Judge Patterson, a notoriously police-friendly jurist who had repeatedly ruled against plaintiffs in misconduct cases. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. Patterson denied the restraining order, claiming Aria had presented insufficient evidence connecting specific individuals to the alleged harassment. He dismissed the vandalism as unfortunate but unrelated criminal activity and suggested that Aria was attempting to leverage unrelated incidents to bolster a weak claim against respected officers. With her apartment uninhabitable and the courts offering no protection, Aria reluctantly moved in with her parents in the suburbs. The family home where she had grown up now became a reluctant sanctuary. "This isn't right," her father insisted, his voice tight with controlled anger as he helped carry her suitcases inside. "You shouldn't have to hide for doing your job." Within 3 days, her parents' neighbors began receiving anonymous letters describing Aria as a dangerous criminal sympathizer who was under investigation for serious ethical violations. The letters warned neighbors to protect their families from her influence. The following Sunday, her mother discovered their car vandalized in the church parking lot. Race traitor had been scratched deeply into the silver Honda's paint. The church's security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact time frame of the incident. The constant vigilance and mounting pressure began taking a physical toll. Aria suffered her first panic attack after spotting a patrol car parked across from her parents' house for the 3rd consecutive day. The symptoms were terrifying: racing heart, constricted breathing, overwhelming sense of doom. The hospital visit resulted in a diagnosis of acute stress response and a prescription for anti-anxiety medication she was reluctant to take, fearing it might dull her legal acumen when she needed it most. Late one night, as her parents slept, Aria sat on her childhood bed contemplating the seemingly impossible situation. Every avenue of recourse had been blocked. The harassment was escalating despite public attention. Her career was in jeopardy, her safety compromised, and now her family was being targeted. Perhaps backing down was the only rational choice. She had actually begun drafting a withdrawal of her complaint when Eleanor called, her timing uncannily perfect. "Don't you dare give up," Eleanor said without preamble. "They win the moment you start believing you can't win." "They've blocked every legal avenue," Aria countered. "They've infiltrated my firm, compromised internal affairs, and have judges in their pocket. My family's being targeted now." "I've been here before," Eleanor replied softly. 37 years ago, I represented a young man named James Wilder, who had been beaten nearly to death while in police custody. The department destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses, and harassed James's family until he was ready to drop the case. What happened? We found others, other victims, other cases, other patterns that together became impossible to ignore or dismiss. The department could discredit one victim. They could bury one case, but they couldn't silence a dozen voices all telling the same story. Eleanor's words reignited something in Aria. The next morning, an unmarked envelope was delivered to her. Parents' home. Inside were internal police department memos detailing what was called Operation Community Safety, but appeared to be a coordinated strategy for handling problem citizens. The memos outlined tactics disturbingly similar to what Aria had experienced: strategic intimidation, reputation damage, escalating pressure. "I don't know who sent this," Aria told Eleanor when they met to review the documents, "but it confirms what we suspected. This isn't random retaliation. It's a systematic approach to silencing complaints." The memos referenced 5 specific cases where these tactics had been deployed successfully. Working day and night, Aria and Eleanor traced the cases and located the individuals involved. Each told a similar story. After filing complaints against officers, they experienced targeted harassment that eventually forced them to withdraw their allegations and relocate. "We need to bring these cases together," Eleanor decided. "Show the pattern and practice of civil rights violations. A single complaint can be dismissed. 5 plaintiffs describing identical retaliatory tactics becomes much harder to ignore. As they built this expanded case, connecting the dots between seemingly isolated incidents, Eleanor's office was broken into overnight. Files were stolen, her computer system hacked and case notes destroyed. The message was spray-painted across her office wall: "Stop now or burn." Would you comment number 1 if you think people should stand together against intimidation rather than suffer alone? Hit that like button if you believe in the power of documenting patterns of abuse. Subscribe to see how ordinary citizens can fight back against systemic injustice. What would you do if powerful forces targeted not just you, but your family? The battle is intensifying, but wait until you see what crucial evidence emerges next. The federal courthouse stood as a monument to justice, its imposing columns and broad steps designed to inspire confidence in the rule of law. As Arya and Eleanor climbed those steps with their expanded team of plaintiffs, that architectural promise felt both ironic and aspirational. The system represented by this building had failed them individually. Perhaps together they could make it function as intended. Their federal civil rights lawsuit was ambitious in scope. It named not just Officer Brennan but Lieutenant Hayes, Police Commissioner Lawrence, and the department itself as defendants. The complaint detailed not only Arya's original assault, but the coordinated campaign of harassment and the identical patterns across all 5 plaintiffs' experiences. Most crucially, it alleged a departmental pattern and practice of civil rights violations, triggering federal oversight provisions that could potentially place the entire department under court supervision. "They'll fight this with everything they have," Eleanor warned the group as they finished reviewing the final filing. "The department, the city, even judges who consider themselves allies of law enforcement, expect motions to dismiss, attacks on your credibility, and escalating pressure to drop the case." "We've already experienced their worst," replied Maria Diaz, one of the other plaintiffs whose business had been repeatedly raided after she filed a complaint about excessive force. "At least now, we're fighting back together." As expected, the department's legal team immediately filed multiple motions to dismiss, claiming sovereign immunity, challenging jurisdictional authority, and attacking each plaintiff's standing individually. They requested an expedited hearing on these motions, clearly hoping to kill the case before discovery could begin. 3 days of intensive preparation followed. Arya and Eleanor barely slept, anticipating every possible legal argument and preparing comprehensive responses. The case's complexity was both challenge and advantage. With so many threads of evidence across multiple plaintiffs, the pattern became harder to dismiss as coincidence. Their cautious optimism grew when Judge Michaela Richardson was assigned to the case. As one of the few black female federal judges in the district, she had a reputation for meticulous adherence to procedural law and impartiality that made her rulings virtually appeal-proof. Predictably, the department's attorneys immediately filed a motion to recuse Judge Richardson, claiming her race created an inherent bias in a case involving allegations of racial discrimination. The transparent attempt to remove the one judge least likely to be unduly influenced by police department connections infuriated Arya. "They're not even pretending anymore," she told Eleanor as they drafted their opposition to the recusal motion. "They're explicitly arguing that a black judge can't be impartial about civil rights, which gives us our opening," Eleanor replied. "Their motion itself demonstrates the exact bias we're alleging exists throughout the department." The recusal hearing became Arya's moment to shine. With Eleanor still recovering from the physical toll of the recent break-in, Arya took lead in arguing against the department's motion. Her preparation was evident as she systematically dismantled their argument, citing precedent after precedent, establishing that a judge's race did not constitute grounds for recusal. "Your Honor," Arya concluded, "if we accept the defendants' logic that your racial identity automatically creates bias, we would establish a precedent that only white judges could preside over discrimination cases. This would itself be a form of structural discrimination that perpetuates the very injustices our civil rights laws were created to address." Judge Richardson denied the recusal motion, her detailed opinion leaving little room for successful appeal. It was their first victory, small but significant. The preliminary hearing on the department's motions to dismiss was scheduled for the following week. The night before, Eleanor suffered what was initially diagnosed as severe food poisoning, leaving her hospitalized and unable to attend. The timing was suspicious, but there was no time to investigate. Arya would have to argue alone. Despite her extensive litigation experience, Arya had never personally argued a federal civil rights case of this magnitude. With less than 12 hours to prepare, she reviewed every note, rehearsed every argument, and steeled herself for what would clearly be a defining moment in her career. Entering the courtroom alone, Arya noticed the defendant's table was crowded with the department's legal team, external counsel hired by the city, and Lieutenant Hayes, himself smirking confidently. The message was clear. They expected to overwhelm her. The hearing began with the defendant's motion to dismiss based on sovereign immunity. Arya countered with precise citations, establishing exceptions for pattern and practice violations. Judge Richardson's penetrating questions to both sides revealed her thorough understanding of the nuanced legal landscape. Then came the surprise the department had clearly been saving. Their lead attorney stood and announced they had witnesses present, who would testify that Arya had actually been the aggressor in the original incident with Officer Brennan. Your Honor, Plaintiff Jackson approached Officer Brennan in the courthouse, verbally assaulted him with profanities, and physically invaded his personal space, causing him to defensively create distance. We have 3 witnesses prepared to testify to these facts. The witnesses were 2 junior officers and a courthouse clerk who all claimed to have seen Arya initiate the confrontation. Their prepared statements were nearly identical in phrasing, suggesting careful coordination. More damaging was what came next. The department's attorney played a video clip purportedly from courthouse security cameras showing a partial interaction between Arya and Brennan. The carefully edited footage showed only Arya gesturing emphatically and Brennan stepping backward, with the actual physical contact conveniently occurring just outside the frame. This directly contradicts Ms. Jackson's version of events, the attorney said triumphantly, and calls into question the credibility of her entire complaint. Your Honor, Arya responded, maintaining her composure, the defendants have presented a selectively edited video that deliberately excludes the assault itself. I have the complete recording from my phone, which captures not only the physical assault, but Officer Brennan's subsequent admission of evidence tampering in prior cases. The plaintiff claims to have a recording that we have reason to believe has been altered, the department's attorney interjected. We request any such recording be subjected to forensic authentication before being considered. Judge Richardson turned to Arya. Counselor, can you address the authentication concern? Absolutely, Your Honor. We anticipated this claim and have already had the recording authenticated by Marcus Green, a certified digital forensics expert whose credentials I've included in our supplemental filing. Mr. Green is present today and prepared to testify regarding the recording's integrity. Marcus's testimony proved decisive. His methodical explanation of the technical authentication processes established that Arya's recording was unaltered, while the department's video showed clear signs of editing. The department's video has multiple frame discontinuities consistent with deliberate removal of content, Marcus explained. Additionally, the timestamp metadata reveals approximately 47 seconds missing from their version. Judge Richardson's expression remained neutral, but her questions became increasingly pointed toward the department's attorneys. By the conclusion of the 6-hour hearing, she had denied all motions to dismiss and set an accelerated schedule for discovery. Given the serious nature of these allegations and the evidence suggesting potential witness intimidation, this court will prioritize a speedy resolution, she declared. Defendants will have 30 days to produce all requested documents, and depositions will begin immediately thereafter. As Arya was collecting her materials, Judge Richardson called her to the bench. Counselor, off the record, you should be aware that my chambers received certain communications attempting to influence this case. I have referred those matters to the appropriate authorities. I suggest you take extra precautions with your personal security. Arya nodded her thanks, the warning both chilling and validating. As she drove to share the news of their procedural victory with Eleanor, A call came from her father. "Someone broke into the house while we were at your uncle's," he said, his voice uncharacteristically shaken. "They didn't take anything valuable, but all our family photos are gone, and they left something on your bed." On her childhood bed, the intruders had arranged newspaper clippings of attorneys who had been assaulted or killed after challenging powerful interests. In red marker, someone had drawn targets over their faces and written across the top, "You're next." The morning news anchor's perfectly maintained smile contained a hint of skepticism as she introduced the segment. "Continuing our coverage of allegations against the police department, questions have emerged about attorney Aria Jackson's history and motivations. Some are asking whether this case is about justice or personal advancement." The report that followed was a masterclass in character assassination disguised as journalism. Old photographs from Aria's college years were shown out of context, including one of her at a campus protest against military recruitment that the segment framed as anti-American activism. A brief academic paper she had written examining critical perspectives on law enforcement was characterized as a manifesto against police. Most damaging was an interview with a former client who claimed Aria had encouraged him to exaggerate claims of mistreatment to strengthen his case. The station never mentioned that this client had recently had his sentence reduced after cooperating with the department on community information initiatives. The comment sections beneath online versions of the story filled with vitriol, much of it nakedly racist and threatening. Carefully crafted comments questioning Aria's professionalism and ethics appeared simultaneously across multiple platforms, many using identical phrasing despite coming from supposedly different users. "They're controlling the narrative," Eleanor observed as they monitored the coverage from her hospital room, where she was still recovering. "And they're good at it. They're not just attacking your credibility. They're framing this as you versus the entire concept of law enforcement." Simultaneously, the department launched a public relations campaign highlighting community outreach programs, officer bravery, and heartwarming stories of police going above and beyond. Commissioner Lawrence made appearances at schools and churches, emphasizing the department's commitment to serving all citizens with dignity and respect. Social media influencers with large local followings suddenly began posting content supportive of the department, often with captions mentioning partnerships or sponsored content. The coordinated nature was obvious to media-savvy observers, but effective nonetheless in shaping public perception. "We need to fight back on this front too," Aria decided, "not just in court, but in the court of public opinion." Together with the other plaintiffs, they organized a community forum at a local church. The event was designed to create space for citizens to share their experiences with police harassment and retaliation. Eleanor's decades of civil rights work had taught her the power of collective testimony. Individual stories might be dismissed, but patterns became undeniable when multiple voices spoke truth in the same space. The forum began modestly with about 50 attendees, but as emotional testimonies accumulated, more people arrived. Individuals who had never formally filed complaints found courage in the shared space, stepping forward to describe encounters that echoed those of the official plaintiffs with disturbing similarity. Marcus set up live streaming, and viewership grew to thousands as the evening progressed. The raw authenticity of the stories stood in stark contrast to the department's polished PR campaign. Viewers commented with their own experiences, creating a digital chorus of previously silenced voices. Midway through the event, Damon Rodriguez, a local journalist who had consistently covered police accountability issues, received a phone call while preparing to speak. His face visibly paled as he listened, but instead of being intimidated, he approached the microphone. "I just received a call warning me that continuing to cover this story would have career-ending and potentially life-altering consequences," he announced. "The caller knew details about my children's school schedules and my wife's medical history." Damon paused, visibly collecting himself. "I want to say publicly that this attempt at intimidation has only strengthened my commitment to investigating these allegations thoroughly. Journalists cannot function in a society where those with power can threaten them into silence." His courage galvanized the room and transformed the media narrative. The threatening call became the story, providing concrete evidence of the intimidation tactics that had previously been dismissed as paranoia or exaggeration. National civil rights organizations that had been hesitant to become involved now reached out to offer support, resources, and additional legal expertise. The hashtag Tony Police Accountability Now began trending nationally, with Aria's case becoming emblematic of broader concerns about law enforcement retaliation against critics. The department's response was to double down on their PR campaign, significantly increasing spending on community events and advertising. This strategic error provided Eleanor with an opening. Through careful public records requests, her team discovered the department was using taxpayer funds, earmarked for community policing initiatives, to finance what amounted to a propaganda campaign against private citizens. When this misappropriation of public funds was exposed by Damon Rodriguez in a front-page investigation, city council members began distancing themselves from Commissioner Lawrence. The mayor, initially supportive of the department, called for an independent audit of police spending. As public sentiment shifted, Eleanor received an anonymous delivery containing surveillance photographs. The images showed officers in plainclothes, monitoring the church where the community forum had been held, photographing attendees, and recording license plate numbers. This direct evidence of police surveillance of lawful community assembly sparked outrage even among moderate voices who had previously given the department the benefit of the doubt. "The tide is turning," Aria told her fellow plaintiffs during their weekly strategy meeting. "But we can't get complacent. They'll have contingency plans for losing the public relations battle." Her warning proved prescient when a coordinated social media campaign emerged attacking the credibility of every plaintiff individually. Each attack was carefully crafted to exploit potential vulnerabilities. Marcus was accused of hacking police systems. Maria's business was reported to health inspectors for fabricated violations, and another plaintiff's decades-old misdemeanor was framed as evidence of criminal tendencies. "They're getting desperate," Eleanor noted. "These scattered attacks lack the cohesion of their earlier strategy. They're reacting now rather than controlling." The most significant breakthrough came when a national news program decided to feature the case, providing a platform that local media could not suppress or influence. The segment included interviews with former officers from other departments who confirmed that retaliatory tactics against problem citizens were neither new nor unique to this particular department. As the media battle intensified, Aria received an unexpected call from Thomas Bennett, her former colleague who had been revealed as a department plant. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he began, his voice unsteady. "But there's something you need to know. This goes higher than Brennan or Hayes. Much higher. And it's not just about silencing complaints. There's a reason they're fighting." "So hard. Why should I believe anything you say?" Aria asked coldly. "Because I've left town, left everything behind. They found out I was having second thoughts, that I'd accessed certain restricted files. I'm calling from 3 states away, and I'll be gone by the time you could trace this. But I've sent something to Eleanor's office, something that explains why they came after you so hard after the Brennan incident." The package arrived the following day, a thumb drive containing what appeared to be an internal database labeled Problem Citizens List. The implications were staggering. "Would you comment number 1 if you think media has a responsibility to investigate intimidation tactics instead of amplifying them? Hit that like button if you believe in the power of community testimony. Subscribe." To discover the shocking contents of that thumb drive in our next segment. How far do you think this conspiracy extends? The truth is more shocking than anyone imagined. The thumb drive contained a meticulously maintained database that defied Aria's worst expectations. The Problem Citizens List catalogued hundreds of individuals across the city who had been targeted for surveillance, harassment, and systematic intimidation. Each entry included personal information, family details, employment history, and specific vulnerability points that could be exploited if the person became problematic for the department. Aria found her own entry, created years before the Brennan incident, apparently triggered by her first cases representing clients in police misconduct lawsuits. The level of detail was chilling. Her parents' address, her college relationships, even notes about her mild shellfish allergy. A separate field labeled pressure points identified her career ambitions and close relationship with her family as primary vulnerabilities. Most disturbing were the action logs attached to many names, documenting coordinated harassment campaigns against civil rights activists, community organizers, and attorneys who had challenged department practices. The entries detailed evidence tampering, strategic intimidation, and deliberate efforts to undermine credibility and careers. "This is beyond retaliation," Eleanor observed, as they reviewed the database with Marcus, who was helping analyze the digital evidence. "This is a systematic program designed to neutralize anyone who might expose department misconduct." Marcus cross-referenced the database entries with public records. Many of these individuals abruptly withdrew complaints, moved away, or otherwise disappeared from public advocacy after these interventions. The success rate is alarming. Officer Brennan's name appeared repeatedly in the action logs, identifying him as a key operative in what was coded as community stabilization efforts. The database revealed he had been involved in at least 17 documented incidents of evidence manipulation and witness intimidation. "Look at this," Arya pointed to financial records embedded in the system. "There's a departmental account labeled Special Operations that's funding these activities." Following the money led to perhaps the most significant discovery. The Special Operations Fund made regular payments to a private security firm called Sentinel Strategic Solutions. Further investigation revealed Sentinel was owned by former high-ranking officers who had left the department under mysterious circumstances. "It's outsourcing," Eleanor realized. "When they need something done that's too risky for active officers, they use Sentinel. That creates plausible deniability for the department." The database contained references to recording devices installed in Arya's apartment after the Brennan incident, confirming Marcus's earlier discovery. What they hadn't known was that similar surveillance had been deployed against dozens of others on the problem citizens list. As they dug deeper, they uncovered evidence that the conspiracy extended beyond the police department. Certain assistant district attorneys were flagged as cooperative resources who could be counted on to decline prosecution of officers or bring charges against targeted citizens based on fabricated evidence. Several judges, including Judge Patterson, who had denied Arya's restraining order, were listed as department assets, with notes about personal issues that ensured their cooperation. Patterson's file referenced gambling debts and a sealed DUI that had apparently been leveraged to secure his loyalty. Most shocking was a program called Operation Clean Slate that specifically targeted black attorneys who represented clients in police misconduct cases. The initiative's stated goal was to discourage legal enablers of anti-police sentiment in minority communities. Arya was listed as a priority target due to her successful record and growing influence. "We need to take this to the FBI," Arya decided after they had thoroughly documented the database contents. "This goes beyond civil rights violations into organized criminal conspiracy." Through Eleanor's contacts, they secured a meeting with FBI Special Agent Diana Reynolds, who specialized in public corruption cases. Reynolds reviewed their evidence with increasing concern. "This warrants immediate investigation," she confirmed. "What you're describing is potentially RICO territory, a criminal enterprise operating under color of law." Reynolds assembled a task force and began formal interviews with Arya and the other plaintiffs. The investigation appeared to be gaining momentum, with federal agents requesting department records and interviewing potential witnesses. Then, abruptly, Reynolds was removed from the case. Her replacement, Agent Thompson, explained that the investigation was being restructured due to jurisdictional considerations. "So that's bureaucratic doublespeak for someone shut it down," Eleanor fumed, after a frustrating meeting with Thompson, who seemed determined to narrow the investigation's scope to a few rogue officers rather than the systemic corruption they had documented. Marcus discovered why through his own contacts. Reynolds's supervisor, Assistant Director Chambers, regularly played golf with Police Commissioner Lawrence and had received generous donations to his police charity foundation from The same corporate entities that funded the department's community relations initiatives. The corruption goes higher than we thought, Arya realized. They've got hooks into federal law enforcement too. Undeterred, they continued building their case, now focusing on the federal civil lawsuit as their primary vehicle for exposing the conspiracy. The Problem Citizens database provided the crucial evidence connecting individual harassment incidents to departmental policy. During discovery, they obtained internal communications revealing the full scope of Operation Clean Slate. The program had specifically targeted 7 black attorneys in the past 5 years, deploying increasingly aggressive tactics to drive them away from police misconduct cases. 3 had abandoned such cases entirely, 2 had moved to different jurisdictions, and 1 had left legal practice altogether. Arya was the only one who had fought back with sufficient resources and support to withstand the pressure campaign. The discovery of Operation Clean Slate transformed their understanding of what they were fighting. This wasn't just about Brennan's assault or even the subsequent harassment. It was about a deliberate strategy to prevent marginalized communities from accessing effective legal representation when their rights were violated by police. They're not just protecting individual officers, Arya told the other plaintiffs as they prepared for depositions. They're protecting a system that depends on immunity from consequences. As depositions began, lower-ranking officers caught in the conspiracy began looking for ways out. Several approached Eleanor seeking immunity deals in exchange for testimony about their roles in the harassment campaigns. These internal fractures provided crucial first-hand accounts of how the Problem Citizens list operated in practice. Officer James Kendrick, who had been involved in surveillance of several plaintiffs, provided particularly damning testimony about departmental training in intimidation tactics. They called it community management in briefings, but we all knew what it really was. We were taught how to make problems go away without leaving evidence. The conspiracy began unraveling further when financial auditors traced the Special Operations Fund to offshore accounts used to finance the more extreme aspects of the harassment campaigns. These payments created a paper trail directly connecting departmental leadership to criminal activities, including the break-ins at Arya's apartment and Eleanor's office. As their federal court date approached, the evidence they had accumulated painted a comprehensive picture of corruption that spanned decades and involved dozens of current and former officers, supervisors, and city officials. What had begun with a single act of violence in a courthouse, Holloway had exposed a vast machinery of oppression that had operated in the shadows for generations. "They came after you so hard because you were the last one standing," Eleanor told Arya, as they prepared their final pre-trial motions. "They couldn't afford to let you win because it would crack the foundation of their whole system." The night before a critical hearing, Arya received an anonymous text. "Brennan and Hayes meeting tonight at Central Park Boathouse, 11 p.m. Planning something desperate. Watch your back." The morning rush hour traffic came to a standstill as emergency vehicles surrounded Arya's crumpled car at the intersection of Commonwealth and 7th Street. Witnesses described a terrifying scene, her vehicle accelerating uncontrollably through a red light before slamming into a concrete barrier. First responders extracted her from the wreckage, bloodied but conscious, repeatedly telling paramedics it wasn't an accident. The brakes failed completely. At Memorial Hospital, Arya drifted in and out of consciousness, her body a catalogue of fortunately minor injuries, a concussion, fractured wrist, lacerations, and extensive bruising. The attending physician ordered a standard toxicology panel to rule out any substances that might have affected her driving. When Arya fully regained consciousness hours later, Eleanor was at her bedside, looking more grandmother than legal lioness, worry etched deeply into her face. "They tried to kill you," Eleanor said without preamble. "The brakes were completely unresponsive," Arya confirmed. "I pumped them repeatedly, tried the emergency brake, nothing. It was deliberate. I've already called in an independent mechanic to examine the vehicle before the department can interfere, and I filed emergency motions for protection with Judge Richardson." A nurse entered to check Arya's vital signs, her name tag reading Flores. As she adjusted the IV, she leaned close, whispering, "Someone accessed your medical records electronically an hour ago." "Not hospital staff. I've worked here 15 years and know everyone. Be careful what goes in your chart." After Nurse Flores left, Eleanor closed the door. "We need to move you as soon as medically possible. They know exactly where you are, my..." "Toxicology results? Conveniently misplaced, according to the lab. I suspect they'll never be found if they showed evidence of tampering." That evening, Aria's parents arrived, her mother's eyes red from crying, her father's face set in a mask of barely controlled rage. "This has to stop," he insisted. "No case is worth your life." "It's not just about my case anymore, Dad," Aria explained wearily. "It's about hundreds of people who've been terrorized by this system. If I back down, they win, and it keeps happening to others." Her father shook his head. "There are other ways to fight injustice that don't involve making yourself a target." "James," her mother interjected, "she gets her stubbornness from you. Remember when you refused to move your barbershop despite those developer threats?" The family debate was interrupted by a phone call. Eleanor answered, her expression growing increasingly grave. "I understand. Yes, we'll take precautions. Thank you for the warning." She hung up and turned to Aria. "That was Officer Jackson. Not related to you," she added for clarity. "He's one of the good ones inside the department. He says there's been talk about finishing the job since the car accident failed. He's risking everything by calling us." Officer Terrell Jackson had been silently monitoring the department's darker operations for years, documenting what he could without raising suspicion. The attempted murder of a prominent attorney had pushed him past his moral breaking point. "I can get you more," Jackson promised when they met secretly after Aria's discharge to a safe house Eleanor maintained for witnesses in high-risk cases. "I've been keeping my own records for 3 years. Names, dates, recordings when possible." "Why?" "Come forward now," Aria asked. Jackson's expression hardened. "I became an officer to protect people, not terrorize them. When I heard Hayes laughing about your accident and planning worse, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, no matter the risk. With Jackson's help, they identified a faction within the department that was deeply uncomfortable with the harassment campaigns but had remained silent out of fear or complicity. Jackson made careful approaches to trusted colleagues, building a small but significant group of officers willing to document misconduct. These insider allies began wearing concealed recording devices during key meetings and shifts. The evidence they gathered was damning. Lieutenant Hayes explicitly directing officers to intimidate witnesses, Brennan boasting about tampering with Aria's car, supervisors coordinating surveillance and break-ins. Most significant was a recorded strategy session where Brennan, Hayes, and 3 other officers planned to plant evidence in Aria's residence to discredit her. "A little cocaine goes a long way toward destroying an attorney's credibility," Hayes had remarked to approving laughter. Jackson's group also captured a closed-door meeting with Commissioner Lawrence himself, where he instructed departmental leadership to make this whole thing disappear, whatever it takes. When a junior commander expressed concern about potential federal investigation, Lawrence responded chillingly, "We have friends in those offices too. This stays in-house, understood?" With this growing body of evidence, Aria and Eleanor refined their legal strategy, focusing on RICO charges that would allow them to target the entire corrupt enterprise rather than individual actors. The evidence of conspiracy was now undeniable, but they needed to ensure it reached the right authorities before the department could neutralize it. The breakthrough came during an attempted break-in at Aria's recovery location. Officer Jackson and 2 allies had anticipated the operation based on intercepted communications and were waiting when Brennan and a Sentinel operative arrived with lockpicks and planted evidence. The ensuing confrontation was captured on multiple recording devices, including Brennan's inadvertent confession when he realized he'd been caught. "You have no idea how high this goes, Jackson. We're protected better than you can imagine." This moment of open conflict within the department created the first major crack in the blue wall of silence. With irrefutable evidence of criminal conspiracy captured by fellow officers, the department's unified front began crumbling. Officers not directly involved in the corruption started coming forward, unwilling to risk their careers protecting criminals within their ranks. Would you comment number 1 if you believe whistleblowers within corrupt systems deserve protection and support? Hit that like button if you agree that accountability must apply to everyone, regardless of badge or uniform. Subscribe to witness the final confrontation between justice and corruption. What do you think will happen to Officer Jackson and the other brave officers who broke the code of silence? The walls are closing in on the conspiracy, but the most dangerous enemies are those with nothing left to lose. Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Zhang sat perfectly still, her expression professionally neutral, despite the extraordinary evidence being presented in her office. After reviewing the recordings, financial documents and testimonies for nearly 3 hours, she closed the case file and looked directly at Arya and Eleanor. "This warrants immediate federal intervention," she stated conclusively. "The pattern of civil rights violations alone would justify our involvement, but the evidence of organized criminal activity within the department elevates this significantly." Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division announced a formal investigation into the department's practices. Attorney General Mitchell personally appointed Special Prosecutor Jonathan Rivera to oversee the case, signaling its priority status within the Justice Department. The public announcement sent shockwaves through the department's command structure. Commissioner Lawrence was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, though the official statement cited health concerns rather than acknowledging the allegations against him. Lieutenant Hayes and Officer Brennan were suspended without pay, their department credentials and weapons confiscated. For the first time since the original assault, momentum had clearly shifted in favor of accountability. An independent commission comprised of retired judges, civil rights attorneys, and law enforcement experts from other jurisdictions was appointed to conduct a comprehensive review of departmental policies and practices. Media coverage shifted dramatically as national outlets picked up the story of systemic corruption. Reporters who had previously accepted department narratives now pursued aggressive investigations, competing to uncover additional aspects of the conspiracy. The Problem Citizens database became front-page news, with numerous individuals coming forward to confirm they had experienced the targeted harassment documented in the files. Arya's testimony before the City Council, delivered with quiet dignity, despite still visible injuries from her car accident, proved particularly powerful. She methodically outlined how the department had weaponized its authority against citizens who dared to seek accountability, emphasizing that this was not about attacking police, but about ensuring equal application of the law. "A badge cannot be a shield against accountability," she told the packed chamber. "When we allow any group to operate outside the law in the name of enforcing it, we undermine the very foundation of justice." The council voted unanimously to establish a civilian oversight committee with actual disciplinary authority, a reform that had been repeatedly blocked by department influence for decades. Arya was invited to serve as a consultant in developing the committee's structure and procedures. As the federal investigation progressed, more officers came forward with information, many seeking cooperation agreements to avoid prosecution. The department fractured into factions, those implicated in corruption, those actively cooperating with investigators, and a confused middle group unsure where their loyalties should lie in the rapidly changing landscape. Internal departmental documents leaked to journalists revealed explicit racial profiling directives and performance evaluations that rewarded officers for aggressive enforcement in minority neighborhoods while discouraging similar tactics in affluent white areas. These revelations broadened public understanding of how systemic discrimination had been operationalized through seemingly neutral policies. Officer Jackson and his allies received formal whistleblower protection from the Department of Justice, though they continued facing hostility from colleagues loyal to the old regime. Jackson's testimony about the evolution of the Problem Citizens program was particularly damaging, revealing how it had grown from informal retaliation against specific complaints into a sophisticated system for neutralizing any perceived threats to departmental autonomy. Brennan and his closest allies made one final desperate attempt to discredit Arya. They produced a witness named Victor Ramirez, who claimed to have had a romantic relationship with Arya, during which she allegedly expressed hatred for police and planned to bring down the department by any means necessary. This character assassination attempt backfired spectacularly when Eleanor's investigative team discovered financial records showing Ramirez had received $50,000 from an account connected to Sentinel Strategic Solutions just days before coming forward. Under cross-examination during a preliminary hearing, Ramirez admitted he had never actually met Arya and had been coached on his testimony by a consultant connected to the department. The failed witness tampering attempt accelerated the federal case, with the grand jury proceedings moving forward at unprecedented speed. Prosecutors presented evidence of civil rights violations, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy extending throughout the department's command, structure, and into city government. "They're turning on each other now," Eleanor observed as they reviewed updates from the grand jury proceedings. Hayes is offering testimony against Lawrence. Brennan is trying to implicate Hayes in exchange for leniency, and everyone's trying to minimize their own involvement. "And the problem citizens list?" Arya asked. "Are they getting the full scope of that program?" "Rivera's team is mapping every case," Eleanor confirmed. "They've identified over 300 individuals who were targeted over the past decade. The pattern is undeniable." Public opinion, once carefully managed by department PR efforts, had shifted decisively. Community forums overflowed with citizens, sharing experiences of intimidation and harassment that they had previously been too frightened to report. The hashtag #MockNoMoreSilence trended nationally as similar patterns emerged in other jurisdictions, inspired by Arya's stand. Even traditionally pro-police voices found the evidence of corruption indefensible. A prominent conservative radio host, who had initially dismissed the allegations, devoted an entire program to interviewing officers who had been pressured to participate in unethical practices, concluding that true support for law enforcement means demanding the highest ethical standards, not enabling corruption. The city government, recognizing the political liability of continued association with the department leadership, began distancing itself from Commissioner Lawrence and his inner circle. The mayor established an emergency response team to cooperate fully with federal investigators and implement immediate reforms rather than waiting for the investigation's conclusion. Police unions, initially combative in defending their members, shifted to a more nuanced position after internal elections replaced leadership that had been complicit in covering up misconduct. The new union president publicly committed to protecting officers' rights while recognizing our responsibility to police ourselves and uphold constitutional standards. For Arya, vindication came with exhaustion. The physical and emotional toll of the past months had been immense. As she sat with Eleanor, reviewing prosecutor updates, she realized how fundamentally her life had changed since that day in the courthouse hallway. "I keep thinking about all the people who couldn't fight back," she told Eleanor, "who didn't have the resources or platform or support that I've had, who just had to absorb the abuse and move on." "That's why this case matters so much," Eleanor replied. "It's not just about what happened to you. It's about changing a system that allowed it to happen to hundreds of others." A call from Special Prosecutor Rivera brought momentous news. The federal grand jury had returned indictments against Officer Brennan, Lieutenant Hayes, Commissioner Lawrence, and 4 other high-ranking department officials. The charges included civil rights violations, conspiracy, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, 17 officers and civilian employees faced lesser charges related to their roles in the harassment campaigns. "This is unprecedented in scope," Rivera told them. The grand jury was particularly disturbed by the systematic targeting of attorneys and community advocates. They've recommended maximum charges in most cases. As news of the indictments broke, Arya stood at Eleanor's office window, watching protesters gather in the plaza below. Unlike previous demonstrations, this crowd included people from all backgrounds, neighborhoods, and political perspectives, united in demanding accountability and reform. Signs reading "Justice for all means all" and "Equal protection under law" waved alongside "Support good police, remove the bad," and "Accountability strengthens community." The diverse coalition reflected a fundamental shift in how the public understood the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. "Look," Eleanor said, pointing to a particular section of the crowd. "Those are officers in the demonstration." As Special Prosecutor Rivera prepared the federal case for trial, Aria and Eleanor focused on their civil lawsuit, which would provide financial restitution to victims and fund systemic reforms. The settlement negotiations took on a different character as city officials, eager to resolve the crisis and rebuild public trust, approached with unprecedented openness to substantive changes. "We have leverage now that we've never had before," Eleanor told Aria during a strategy session. "This is our opportunity to cement institutional changes that will outlast the current outrage cycle." Their settlement demands included not just financial compensation but structural reforms, independent oversight with disciplinary authority, transparent complaint procedures, protection for whistleblowers, and comprehensive retraining focused on constitutional rights and anti-bias practices. By focusing on structural changes rather than simply punishing individuals, they were laying groundwork for lasting transformation in how law enforcement operated within the community. The fight that had begun with a single assault in a courthouse hallway was evolving into a blueprint for national reform. The federal courthouse was surrounded by media, protesters, and security as the indicted officers arrived for arraignment. Officer Brennan, once swaggering with confidence in his impunity, looked diminished in civilian clothes, his eyes darting nervously as federal marshals escorted him through the gauntlet of cameras and chanting crowds. Inside, Special Prosecutor Rivera presented the government's case with methodical precision. The indictments charged Brennan, Hayes, Commissioner Lawrence, and 7 other officers with multiple federal crimes, including civil rights violations, conspiracy, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. If convicted on all counts, they faced decades in prison. As the charges were read, Aria sat in the gallery beside Eleanor, her expression composed despite the emotional weight of the moment. This public acknowledgement of wrongdoing represented vindication not just for her, but for hundreds of victims whose voices had been systematically silenced over the years. Outside legal proceedings, the consequences mounted swiftly. Commissioner Lawrence resigned before the City Council could commence impeachment hearings. The mayor appointed an interim commissioner from outside the department, a retired federal judge with a strong civil rights background, to oversee immediate reforms while a nationwide search for permanent leadership began. Brennan, seeing former allies distancing themselves and the overwhelming evidence against him, attempted to negotiate a plea deal offering to testify against higher-ranking officials. His cooperation proved valuable, revealing how the harassment program had been sanctioned at the highest levels of city government. "It wasn't just our idea," he admitted in recorded testimony. "We had approval from the commissioner, the mayor's office knew even some judges were brought in to ensure certain cases went the right way. They all wanted problematic citizens and lawyers controlled. They just didn't want to know exactly how we did it." The trial became a watershed moment for police accountability nationally. Evidence presented in open court documented decades of systematic abuses, particularly targeting black citizens and their advocates. The problem citizens list, projected on courtroom screens, showed how racial bias had been operationalized through supposedly neutral policies. When Aria's original recording of the assault was finally played in court, the audience fell completely silent. Brennan's voice echoed through the chamber, his casual admission of evidence tampering and intimidation tactics, capturing the entitlement that had characterized departmental culture for generations. After 3 weeks of damning testimony, including accounts from multiple officers who had participated in harassment campaigns, the jury needed only 7 hours to reach unanimous guilty verdicts on all major counts. Brennan received a 15-year sentence, while Lieutenant Hayes and Commissioner Lawrence received 12 and 10 years respectively. The other convicted officers received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. Beyond the criminal proceedings, the city settled the federal civil rights lawsuit for a record amount, publicly acknowledging decades of wrongdoing and committing to extensive reforms. The settlement included not just financial compensation for victims, but funding for a new civilian oversight board with actual disciplinary authority. Eleanor was subsequently appointed to a judicial position by the governor, her decades of civil rights work recognized as essential preparation for reshaping how the legal system addressed issues of police misconduct and accountability. For Arya, the journey from victim to catalyst for change culminated in establishing the Justice Access Foundation, using her portion of the settlement to provide legal representation to those who would otherwise face powerful institutions alone. The foundation specialized in civil rights cases, ensuring that future victims of misconduct would not have to fight isolated battles against systematic intimidation. The department itself underwent profound transformation, beginning with mandatory retraining on constitutional rights, implicit bias, and community engagement for all officers. The toxic culture that had protected abusers began shifting as new leadership prioritized ethical conduct and community trust over blind loyalty. Perhaps most significantly, a new generation of officers, inspired by Terrell Jackson's courage, began speaking out against misconduct rather than protecting it with silence. The Blue Wall showed signs of evolving into a professional standard where protecting community trust took precedence over protecting corrupt colleagues. 1 year after the verdicts, Arya stood before a class of law students at the local university, where she had accepted a position teaching civil rights law. Looking out at their eager faces, she recognized the responsibility of preparing the next generation of advocates to continue the work of building more just institutions. "The law is only as strong as our willingness to apply it equally," she told them. "The Constitution promises equal protection, but that promise remains empty without advocates willing to hold powerful institutions accountable." As she lectured, she noticed several young police cadets in the back row, diligently taking notes. Their presence in her class represented perhaps the most promising sign that meaningful change was taking root, the recognition that accountability strengthened rather than undermined legitimate law enforcement. The system wasn't fixed. Arya harbored no illusions about the ongoing work required to maintain and extend the reforms they'd achieved. But the equilibrium had shifted. Citizens had tools for accountability they had previously been denied, and a blueprint for challenging systemic abuses had been established. When she revisited the courthouse where Brennan had assaulted her, Arya felt not just the echo of that trauma, but the profound satisfaction of knowing that her refusal to be silenced had created space for hundreds of others to speak their truth. The journey from victim to victor had transformed not just her life, but the community's understanding of what justice required. The courthouse hallway looked different now, not just physically with its new security cameras and civilian monitors, but symbolically. What had once been a space where power could operate with impunity had become a symbol of the possibility of accountability, a reminder that no one, regardless of badge or authority, stood above the law. As Arya walked those marble corridors, now a respected professor and advocate rather than a target, she carried the weight of knowing that vigilance would always be necessary. But she also carried the strength of having faced the worst the system could deploy against her, and having not just survived, but transformed that system through her refusal to be silenced. Justice, she had learned, was not an achievement, but an ongoing process, requiring constant tending and protection. The victory wasn't in reaching a perfect endpoint, but in shifting the balance of power enough that others could continue the work with more tools and fewer barriers than she had faced. And in that understanding, that her fight had been just one chapter in a much longer story of progress, Arya found a peace that transcended the trauma and vindication of her personal journey. She had done what justice required of her. Others would carry that work forward, standing on the foundation she had helped build. Arya Jackson's story teaches us that true justice requires both courage and community. When powerful systems retaliate against those who demand accountability, the greatest defense is refusing to fight alone. Though intimidation tactics can be devastating, they reveal the system's fundamental weakness. It fears accountability more than anything. This case demonstrates that institutional corruption depends on isolation and silence to survive. By connecting individual experiences into recognizable patterns, victims transform from easy targets into a formidable collective force. Justice isn't achieved through a single victory, but through persistent pressure that reveals the full scope of systemic problems. Most importantly, we learn that when brave individuals like Aria, Eleanor, and Officer Jackson choose principle over protection, they create pathways for others to follow. Real change happens when we recognize that justice isn't just about individual cases, but about transforming the systems that allow abuse to flourish in the first place. What institutions in your community need greater accountability? Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against corruption despite the personal cost? Comment below with your experiences or thoughts on how we can better protect whistleblowers who risk everything for justice. If you believe everyone deserves equal protection under the law regardless of race or status, please like this video. Subscribe for more powerful stories of everyday heroes fighting against racist systems and discrimination in America. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to continue their own fight for justice. Thank you for joining us in this important conversation. Remember that even the smallest voice becomes powerful when it joins a chorus demanding change.